So I'm going to do something different today because Ozzy Osbourne was announced at just passing about half hour ago. And he's such a character that trying to do a tribute of him is pretty difficult and doesn't really sum up all that he was. And I'm a musician, so I'm going to be doing this from a musician's perspective more than a fan's perspective. I will say that the 70s was a little bit early for me, not too much, but a little bit. And Black Sabbath, when I was exposed to them, didn't really impress me that much. I thought, well, it's stoner rock and it's a lot of stuff that's pretty easy to play for a guitar player. And one of the guys I played with, grew up with that and kind of knew a lot of Black Sabbath riffs and used them and stuff, but nothing really super technical there. But it was a major starting point in heavy metal and hard rock. You can't deny that influence on a lot of players. The one thing I remember as a little kid, I used to stay up late at night listening to the FM radio, and Ozzy was being interviewed on one of those channels like KLOS or one of those, and he was asked about his singing and what he thought of his abilities himself. And he said that he was pretty much adequate, that there was guys that were better than him, but he got across, the messages that he wanted to send. And anyone can say, you know what, he definitely had his own style of singing. It was solid. I remember Maria at the recording studio that I used to go to a lot mentioned that he had what was called like the Ozzy machine, and it was basically like a doubler with some extra stuff on it that kind of made his tone, and he used it all the time. So in a way, his voice, even though it wasn't like a 80s wailer kind of singing, it was recognizable and solid, and that effect got him across even better. My wife and I, when we were first dating, went and saw Ozzy with Korn at the Forum, and I'd never seen him before. I'd seen Korn once before. The funny story about that show is the bass player stood with his foot up on the monitor, and he kind of slipped off and fell on the ground, and his bass just went plong, and it was reverberating through the whole stadium, and he was kind of shaking it off like, whoa, that really hurt. And he finally got up after a while and played. And then Ozzy came out, and I guess they call it like the froggy stomp or something he did on stage. He pretty much didn't do much. He just kind of stood in one place, and every once in a while he'd kind of lift and do this little stomp thing, and he'd get, looks like only about an inch off the ground when he did it, and it was kind of like, that's it. And he'd pretty much just stand up there and sing, and that's about all you got. So visually it wasn't that exciting, but everybody knew the songs. And then if you get into album by album and all the great people that he surrounded himself, you could look up all the stories of the different musicians that had played with him and had not so great experiences, mostly due to Sharon and shrewd business. But there's been a lot of great guitar players come down the pipe, and you could argue what his best album is, perhaps No More Tears or Blizzard of Oz or one of those. It depends on mostly which guitar player fits your fancy more. If it's, Randy Rhoads, late Randy Rhoads, or Zakk Wylde, or, somebody else. But he managed to keep it going, finding a lot of good players that wrote a lot, well, I shouldn't even say a lot, wrote all of the music, because he didn't play an instrument. And it's pretty amazing that he was able to come up with solid melodies without actually being a player. And the lyrics, that I'm not sure if he had anything to do with the lyrics or not, so I might be saying that incorrectly, but a lot of the things he wrote about were pretty interesting that you wouldn't expect from a stoner rocker kind of guy. And recently, I tried to do a bunch of drum covers of his, and he was one of the artists that would block any cover performances at all. And I had to go and do reverse performances and upload them that way, and then throw some stupid messages in there. So before I get to that part, I'm just going to say, when we went to the Ozzy concert, we only saw a few songs, and my wife had a really bad asthma attack, and we had to leave because we were afraid she'd need to go to the hospital. At that time in her life, she was very, very asthmatic, and that was a touch and go situation there. But back to Ozzy and his legacy. Of course, he, with the TV show, we used to watch him all the time on the TV show, and he again was very self-deprecating, came across kind of like a goofball, which made him more appealing to everybody. Of course, that he didn't have this air of rock star, even though he called himself the Prince of Darkness and all that stuff. It was more or less just an act, and he really seemed like a normal dude. He took a lot of flack from Christian groups. When I showed up to that concert at the Forum with Korn, it was like maybe 1992 or somewhere around there. There was a lot of people out front with picket signs, and how anybody going to the show was going to go to hell and all that stuff. And I'm a believer, and I kind of just laughed it off because, you know, you can listen to stuff and not really have to live by it or whatever. A lot of the lyrics, I don't even know what he said, but I was basically checking out his performance to see what it was like, and wasn't really that impressed, aside from the musicians that played with him. But he seemed like a normal dude, likable, and his TV show was a lot of fun. I even watched the show with his son for a while, doing haunted exploration of buildings and things of that sort, and he kind of would give his opinion onto whether it was real or fake, and that was kind of fun, kind of funny. But yeah, it's definitely a big day, the 22nd of July 2025. It was clear he was on his last legs even before the last tour, the final, or not tour, but the final show with all those big artists, and you could see that his singing was labored, and they used some overdubs and things like that. But I'm just going to take this out with kind of a joke because I think he'd appreciate it. I'm still upset, Ozzy, that I couldn't record forward versions of the drum covers that I uploaded, a lot of them, because you have copyright restrictions on them, and I had to put them in backwards. So